which is why I'd particularly like to hear her response on that one.
My Lords, I welcome this report and agree with the general premise that public transport plays a vital role in urban environments, enabling people to access education, leisure, family and/or work. And it seems to be as important for economic productivity as community dynamism. So the report's recognition that many British towns outside London have inadequate, unreliable and expensive transport infrastructure is of concern, as was acknowledged by the noble Lord Moylan. The consequences can be dire when public transport is not adequate to aid essential travel. Sometimes alternative support is required. For example, there's a story from Blackburn raised by the MP Jake Berry in The Other Place, where parents of 170 SEN pupils have been left in limbo after a specialist subsidised bus service used by Walton Dale High School has been axed due to a huge unaffordable hike in prices. The school is out of area, but as Blackburn and Darwen Council do not have suitable school places for the pupils, the children are stranded because normal public transport is neither suitable nor available, but the council says just get the bus. One parent of a son with Asperger's in Year 7 told Lancs Live, even my son's paediatrician says he would not be safe on public transport. Rick Moore, a local politician leading the campaign with parents, recently organised for them to address the council. And Tilly, a Year 11 pupil, eloquently explained that the walk to the closest bus stop is on an unlit country lane, the pavement is only continuous on one side and has a section of footpath that's so narrow pedestrians are forced onto the road. So much for safeguarding the young. Sadly, the council remain indifferent. But I raise this here to indicate the problems when public transport is inadequate, and also to note it isn't always a solution to the mobility challenges of living in towns that often have poorly served rural areas close by. On another issue, one problem constantly raised in the report is the steady stream of often contradictory demands on councils from central government, often confusing transport priorities. If we look at active travel plans, a euphemistic name given to non-car mobility, for which local authorities receive substantial funding, these schemes, such as cycling lanes and walkable neighbourhoods, have nothing to do with public transport. But worse, prioritising them can be a hindrance in terms of allocation of road space, as we've heard, often with the unintended consequence of increasing congestion. As James Freeman from BRT UK told the committee, at the moment, to favour the cyclist, because that is where the money and the focus are, means public buses have found themselves back in the queue, and the bus services become unreliable and slow as a result. But as the report rightly notes, bus services are only attractive for users if they have some priority over the rest of the traffic, and are therefore able to compete with the undertaking the journey by car. Of course, anyone choosing to travel by car is likely to elicit admonishment, as driving seems to be thoroughly disapproved of in transport policy circles. I found it dispiriting that the report fuelled this by positing improving public transport as a way of reducing car use. I think this is unnecessarily binary, divisive and unhelpful for citizens. The government's response to the Transport Decarbonisation Plan states measures are needed to shift to public and active transport. And the inquiry reports experts saying that a 30% reduction in trips by private car is needed to help meet net zero targets. In this debate, I'm worried the language is misleading, even disingenuous. It's posed by DfT as helping, quote, improve travel choices, and local authorities have been given powers to implement measures to, quote, support improved choices. TfL says that the government has an important role in making public transport, walking and cycling the mode of choice. But the public has not been given a choice at all here. Too often, policies seem coercive and anti-choice. One reason I'm opposed to the report's recommendation that government should set explicit targets for a reduction in car journeys is that it's bad enough as it is. Some local authorities have themselves adopted local targets, and these are at the cost of citizens' freedom to choose to drive. Indeed, many drivers now feel like they are the villains in an anti-car crusade in urban areas, often with little regard for democratic scrutiny. We look at the way we've got exorbitant emissions zone charges, widely unpopular. You'll have noted the large Together rally in London on Saturday against ULEZ. And then there's those infernal low-traffic neighbourhoods, roads blocked off with no discussion and no mandate. Hackney Council planning to close 75% of its road space to cars. Bath's first LTN in Southlands has proven highly controversial, but the council have just announced another 48 more LTNs. And despite lively opposition from Bath's grassroots Save Our City campaign, there will also be a £10 million emissions zone, dubbed a Ring of Steel by locals. All over the country, families can no longer drive to their weekly shop. Taxi routes are lengthened and more costly for disabled and elderly getting to GPs, and care workers and plumbers alike are unable to navigate speedy routes to their next appointment. So not so much active travel as anti-travel. On the committee's visit to Birmingham, we're told that meeting the region's 2041 decarbonisation target would require, over the next 10 years, a 35% reduction in car travel and a 50% reduction in all trips, and an 800% increase in wheeling journeys, for example, bikes and scooters. That would be great for the elderly. And therefore, in that context, that there would be a need for a 100% increase in public transport, as though improving public transport is just a means to an anti-car end. Worse, drivers end up getting the blame for problems with public transport. The Transport for West Midlands complain, and a quote from the report, that a preference towards driving is perhaps the biggest barrier to improving public transport. Surveys in the region show why people drive. 87% say their lifestyle requires they own a car or a van. 94% say they enjoy the independence which car ownership gives them. And that word independence is key. Because what's fascinating is that ever since the anti-car policy wonks grabbed the political steering wheel back in the late 90s, and despite the exponential growth of car reduction industry ever since, despite that, the number of cars on the road rose substantially between 1990s and 2020. As the director of the Future Cities project says, and I quote, "What this predominantly shows is that personal mobility remains important to the public despite all the policies that are so hostile to driving, and that actually it's a form of liberation, as especially espoused by women." So I'd just like to urge the Minister not to succumb to pressure to make anti-car measures more explicit, but rather to concentrate on the worthy and vigorously pursued goal of improving public transport in its own terms.